Welcome to another episode of Ditch Your Dorm podcast with Jove. My name is Alex from Jove, and today I have a property manager with us. His name is John Sachs Wilner. His property management company is called Property Management Redefined, and he is redefining the way that property management is done. And today he's going to share with us the way that you should think about property management, how you manage your property as a student leasing your first property. So John, thank you so much for being on a call with us.
Alex, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
John, could you first tell us what is a property manager? What's the role of a property manager in the real estate transaction? How do students interact with a property manager, and what does it mean to them?
Sure. So your property manager is effectively going to be your day-to-day contact. They are acting as an extension of the landlord that actually owns the property. So as a property manager, our role is to help tenants get situated, answer any questions that they might have, and then to help them to understand what charges might be, how their lease works, and to make sure that things are enforced correctly on the lease and that they are being charged correctly for their rental property that they are currently in.
Got it. And when does the student meet the property manager? Is this something that is this someone who they meet while they're looking for a property or after they're already moved in?
So typically a property manager is met after a student has selected a property and they are going to lease the property. And at that point, the property manager would step in. They're usually the ones that are helping to draft the lease. They're the ones that they're talking to about rent collection and any type of questions that they might have, while basically buckling down to say, all right, we're going to take this property.
Got it. And let's talk more about the lease. A lot of students are, this is their first lease they're going to sign. They're coming from maybe the dorms, or maybe they're coming from living with their parents. This is the first apartment that they're going to have, so they're all excited. And it seems like a lot of times the lease just gets signed. And I know that there's some really cautionary tales there. Do you mind sharing with us what a lease looks like and the kind of things that they should consider when approaching signing the lease?
Absolutely, and I think that you really just hit the nail on the head right there, is that you should read the lease fully through. So you're going to have the introduction, right? There's going to be your names, there's going to be the landlord's name, there's going to be the property's address, and then there's going to be some information about maybe if you have co-signers or something like that. And what I'm speaking to is the Pennsylvania Association of Realtors form lease. Leases can look different. So not every lease is going to be the same or look the same. So it's very important to read the lease in its entirety, because a lot of times if you don't read it, it's going to surprise you when someone says to you, oh, you did this wrong, or you need to do this, or you're going to be charged for this. And that's not what a landlord or what a property manager is looking to do. They really want to have a great relationship, and they want to make sure that everyone's abiding by the lease. That way everyone can be happy at the end, and they can still say to everyone, hey, we were excited to have them move in. They're excited to be here. It's been a great experience for everyone so far.
That's great. Are there certain sections of the lease, outside of the price that they're going to pay for the apartment each month, outside of those, what are some of the most important areas that you say would usually go overlooked or come up as surprises?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, understand that most leases make every single person on that lease responsible for every single term on that lease. So that doesn't mean that even though you may have been marketed an apartment that is by the room or something of that type of nature, everyone is going to be responsible for that full rent amount. So if one of your roommates does not pay their rent, you and your co-roommates, if you have any, and then going back to your co-signers, if you have any, will be responsible for making up the difference of that rent amount. And you are all equally responsible for the care of that property. So if one of your roommates does not care for the property, you're all going to be responsible for what that roommate does not care for. Also, most leases have rules and regulations. So the important thing about reading your rules and regulations are to understand, hey, can't bring that waterbed in here, or can't bring that 500-gallon fish tank in here, because when it breaks and goes everywhere, your landlord's going to say to you, well, you're responsible for all the damage you just caused. And then one of the other things that I think that is very important for tenants to look into is renter's insurance. I think it is typically something very overlooked, that is of a minimal cost, but protects you so much in case something does happen.
That's a great point. No one else has brought that up, and you're completely spot on that it's overlooked. I mean, this is renter's insurance is something that is fairly cheap, and if something happens, and let's all be honest, being in college, accidents happen. There are
Sure.
certain nights that get way out of hand, or just acts of nature. But that's a really good point that no one else has brought up. I'm really glad that you did.
Thank you.
On the point of roommates, and you're getting into a legal binding agreement with other people who are your friends or people who you don't know, what types of things should college students expect? What kind of things should they prepare for when selecting their roommates and having conversations of expectations?
So one of the things is obviously, hey, you're looking at personalities. You're going to be living in close quarters with each other. You're going to be studying in close quarters to each other. So you need to make sure that you really do have good personalities that click, that you guys are, if you're clean, you're clean. If someone's messy, you want to kind of know that going into it, because you don't want to have those irritations as you're trying to make your way through college, when you're trying to spend all this time studying and getting A's and making sure that you're getting ready for the next step into the world. But the other thing is you have to have kind of a tough conversation with some people, because financially people come from different backgrounds. So if you're going to rent a place, you want to make sure that everyone can financially support the rent that they're going to have to pay for, whether that comes from friends, family, student loans, whatever the case might be. You do want to make sure that everyone can chip in their part for the rent, and you're not going to be the one that's left saying, "Oh man, I gotta figure out how to make up, roommate A's rent because we're not able to pay that this month."
That's a great point, and it's a tough conversation to have. It seems, especially this is probably the first financial conversation that they're going to have with their peers. Do you have any tips on should they just bring it up bluntly, like, hey, we're going to be living together, let's talk, or is there a different way? Can they say, can this conversation be had with the landlord and how payments are made? Does everyone pay the landlord individually, or do we have to come up with a check together?
And I think that's one of the things that does need to be a blunt conversation, because it's really important to say aggregate the rent together instead of each paying the landlord, because you want to know if there's really going to be a problem very quickly when you're aggregating that rent together to pay the landlord. And if someone's not going to be able to pay their portion, you don't want to be kind of blindsided by the landlord sending you a late notice that says, hey, we're still missing $650 of your rent. It's been due for the past 5 days. Now you have a late fee on top of whatever that past due payment is. And on top of it, if we don't get it soon enough, we're going to have to kind of start some type of process here to really motivate you or move along or come to some type of terms for your past due rent. And nobody wants to be put in that particular situation. Not the manager, not the landlord, not the tenant. It's just not a great place to be.
Got it. On this topic of funds, usually for the monthly amount that is due for, let's say, a 4-bedroom apartment, so four students sharing something, how is that usually paid, or how should they expect it to be paid? Are they paying the landlord or the property manager individually? Do they all have to collect the money and make it in one lump payment? How is that usually done?
So our property management company makes it so that everyone has to pay in one lump payment. So you would have to aggregate all of the money together into one person or one joint account or something of that type of nature, and then pay in one payment to the property manager. Some landlords, some property managers will allow separate payments and try and piece them all together to make sure that everything's okay. And then you also have some property managers that are fully electronic, like we are. You can literally log onto your phone, type in the rent payment amount, hit payment, and the money transfers over. There are checks that can still be sent, but what we're finding more and more is landlords and property managers are switching over to some type of electronic payment method, whether that be Venmo, the property management software, or something else that they use in order to get the money over. But the days of the paper check, I think, are kind of falling to the wayside.
And probably for good reason. So that's good.
I'd have to say so.
Yeah. So if you need to submit your if you need to submit your payment in a lump sum, make sure to have all your roommates Venmo you a couple of days ahead of time, so that it's at least in your Venmo balance to send over, or at least in your bank account if you do need to write a check. Also, regarding funds, I wanted to talk about, there seems to be a misconception of how much students should have saved to put down. So when they sign the lease, they need to put down a certain amount. What should students expect there?
It's a great question. And I think a lot of people are a little surprised by the amount of money that's asked for when it comes time to sign that lease. Some property managers will ask for the entire amount up front from terms of first, last, and security deposit being collected. Some will just collect first and security. Some will say to you that put first down as a deposit, and then we'll collect last and security maybe a month before your lease is supposed to start. All of that is going to be clearly laid out in your lease, and it's very important to understand that there's going to be some type of bulk of money due either at lease signing or partially at lease signing, and then a majority of it then due prior to the lease starting. And you're going to be responsible for coming up with that money, whether that's everyone putting that money together, whether it's Venmoing people or whatever the case might be, but that lease is not going to become effective until that consideration is given.
Tell us more about the security deposit. Is it usually the same amount as rent for 1 month? Is it different? And then how is the security deposit used and then given back? If it is given back, what are the factors there?
Sure. So in terms of security deposit, a landlord's collecting that security deposit because they want to make sure that you have a reason to take care of the property, and they want to actively give you that money back. So most security deposits are 1 month of rent. That 1 month of rent is held in a bank account. It's basically just held there so that as a tenant, okay, if I take care of the property, if I do what I'm supposed to do, I pay my rent on time, I pay my rent in full, I don't put any big holes in the property, I don't leave beer stains on the carpets, I don't leave furniture behind, I'm going to get my security deposit back in full. But if you do things to the property, if you make giant holes in it, if you don't take care of the backyard and clean things up, if you do anything that stains or destroys carpet if you have it, or destroys a hardwood or the appliances, a landlord's going to take that security deposit from you. And we always start out as a property management company wanting to give that money back. We don't want to take money from the tenants. But unfortunately, if you do something that harms the property, we have to do something to make the landlord whole for the damage that you've done.
That's a great point. And so speaking to that, as a student is preparing for the end of their lease, what are some things that they should take into consideration?
Absolutely. So first and foremost, read the lease to see if it has any type of stipulations for what the landlord and property manager are expecting upon your move out. It might say carpets must be professionally cleaned. The property must be professionally cleaned. There should be no effects left behind in the property, no personal effects left behind in the property. Make sure that the lawn's cut. And then also check, what was the condition of the property when it was given to you? A lot of property managers do what's called a move-in inspection. And on that move-in inspection, they detail out any type of little defects or things like that of the property. And of course, you're living in a property, there's going to be some expected normal wear and tear on the property. So don't worry about if you make a little scuff mark on the paint or something like that. What really a property manager and a landlord's worried about is hey, I came through and we thought it'd be really cool to use this wall as a dartboard. Not exactly within the proper terms of a lease. So make sure that if you are going to do something, you can either 1, repair it, or 2, afford to repair it.
Got it. What type of other considerations should students take into account when looking at properties that are off campus? So, on campus, we're part of this ecosystem, let's say, to all college students. And if they're planning to live somewhere else that's a little bit outside of the boundaries of campus, what are some considerations that they should have for the people around them and also themselves?
Absolutely. That's a great question. I think one of the things that you really want to look into is how long is it going to take you to get back to campus? Because if you're living off of campus, is there easy access to public transportation to get you back there? Is the bike route easy? Is the walk easy? You really want to have something that, because you're spending a lot of time on campus, that's going to be easy for you to get back to. Secondly, is it a neighborhood that fits what you're looking for? So are you looking for somewhere that has a lot of coffee shops around? Are you looking for a quieter neighborhood away from maybe Center City? Make sure it's a neighborhood that you spend a couple of days walking around, making sure that it's got all the amenities that you're looking for, and that it is really check marks everything that you're trying to achieve in your housing. Because you can go far enough out and you can get a house at a reasonable price and say, it's going to take me though 30, 40 minutes to get back to campus. Might not work. Budget's great. Distance doesn't work.
That's a great point. When students are considering where to live, whether close to campus or a little further away, what type of consideration should be made in terms of how they start their search and also when they start it?
So I think one of the things that you really want to take a look at when you're going to start your search is how much can you reasonably afford to pay for an apartment? How much can you and your roommates reasonably afford to pay for an apartment? Don't do something that's going to stretch your budget so far that you're going to have problems with going out and having a good time still, or paying for basic needs, or paying for utilities. And that's another thing that people typically don't take into account when they're renting a place is, how much are utilities going to cost me to rent this place? Is it electric heat? Is it gas heat? You know, these things can make very large differences in terms of what your budget number is going to need to be to pay for your property. Secondly, is there convenient access to what you need? You know, restaurants, shopping centers, whatever it might be. So when you're taking that into consideration, look at the neighborhood, then narrow it down to kind of the properties in the neighborhood that you really like. Make sure that they're going to fit what you're looking for. So does it have a living space, or is it just basically bedrooms, kitchen, and that's it? Does it have all the things that you want in it, various amenities, whether it be central air conditioning? Some properties are not provided with microwaves. You know, does it have basement access, backyard, whatever those types of amenities are. And then finally, you're going to want to make sure that doesn't work for everybody in the group. Just because you like the property doesn't mean everyone else is going to be happy in the property. And you don't want to have that type of conflict going on with your roommates prior to even getting into the property.
Got it. Is the are the majority of apartments that are off campus, are they unfurnished, or are some of them come furnished? Because living in a dorm, everything is furnished for you.
Sure. So I would say a majority of the apartments are unfurnished. And it's actually nice to have it unfurnished because it gives you an opportunity to say, cool, I want to go get my own furnishings. I want to make this my place, right? And it gives you an opportunity to be a little funky and a little cool about whatever it is that you might want to put in there. So, you know, it's not, well, here's your bed and it's uncomfortable, and as most dorm beds tend to be, and this is what you got. You get to say, I get to go out and select my mattress that I like that's going to be comfortable for me. And it's not going to be something where, you know, I'm paying for this to be furnished and it looks drabby, but, you know, at least I'm getting an opportunity to live off campus.
Let's talk about the lease term. So what is the standard lease term, and what happens if a student is, let's say, in Philadelphia only for 9 months out of the year?
So that's a great question. The standard lease term is going to be 1 year, so 12 months. The second thing is if you are going to only be there for 9 months, you're still responsible for those extra 3 months. You are on that lease for a full 12 months. So you might look at this and say to yourself, well, I'm not going to be there. You got to notify your property manager if you're not going to be there, because if there's going to be an extended vacancy at that property, they need to know, because you're going to either want to have a property check, or you're still going to be responsible for that property even if you're not there. So it's very, very important to make sure that if you're not going to be there, or if, you know, only his roommate's going to be there from time to time, you let the property manager know so that they can do wellness checks on the property.
What is usually the stance for subletting?
It's a case-by-case basis. I know that most leases are going to say that subletting is not allowed without the express written consent of the landlord. Some landlords will be flexible on it, some not so much. Problem with subletting is you're still responsible on that master lease. So if something happens with that person that's in there subletting, even if it's provided by, you know, consent of the landlord, you're still on the hook for the master lease. So it's a tough thing to get into. And then you could go down roads of they're not paying you, they won't get out. It can become a little bit of a dicey situation.
What kind of advice would you have for, let's say, a student gets a internship in New York and they have to go, how should they approach the conversation with their landlord where they can't pay for the apartment for the 3 months that they're not going to be there? How should they go about approaching that conversation with their property manager and landlord, and what's their best option to approach this?
Sure. So some leases have what's called an early termination clause that talks about maybe a little bit of money that's due up front, or maybe they have to continue paying rent until a new tenant is found. Look for that type of clause, but have a conversation with your property manager. It's very important to have that conversation and say to them, listen, you know, I have an internship, I'm going to be going away. What is something that we can work out here that's going to be beneficial for everybody? Some property managers will say, well, listen, you know, let's start marketing the units, see if we can't get somebody in to help you out. Some property managers will basically just say, hey, here are the terms of the lease. You're on it for the full 12 months. Some property managers will try and say, okay, well, there's an early termination clause. Let's try and work with that. You know, it's going to be a big question as to really what the lease terms say, what the landlord's willing to agree to, and, you know, what the conversation is going to be there. It's really going to vary from property to property, lease to lease.
Got it. So I think this is an important point to bring up because we've heard from different students that are seniors and have rented both at large apartment buildings from private landlords, and also from situations in which a property manager is involved. And approaching this situation is critical and should be handled with care. How would you say the flexibility versus this is what's set in stone is, and in a student approaching the situation, is it okay for them to make an offer to say, here's my situation, can we be flexible, can we come to terms, and if so, where would be the best place to do it? Would it be with the large apartment buildings? Would it be with a property manager, or would it be with a single landlord owner that has one property?
One, I'm going to say, look at your lease. The lease is really going to dictate in terms of flexibility. It's going to say things like landlord could agree to subleasing, what your early termination clause is, things of that type of nature. Approaching these conversations, though, in terms of a smaller landlord to a larger landlord, I think a larger landlord is going to be much more, this is the lease, this is what it is, there's really no flexibility, whereas a smaller landlord might be able to work a little bit more, but still within the confines of the lease. So they might say to you, hey, I'm a little more willing to do subleasing, you know, with my agreement, whereas a larger landlord might say, hey, this is the lease, this is what's written, there is no subleasing, so you have to rent this for the 12 months and we expect to be paid for the 12 months that you're supposed to be here. And, you know, a lot of things that students need to look into is, does the landlord report for credit if they don't pay their rent? If you just kind of disappear on this lease, what's going to happen? There could be a lot of bad things that could happen if you just decide to up and say, hey, I'm not willing to pay my rent anymore. So it's really something that we encourage students, one, have a conversation with the landlords, be upfront, see if there's something that can be worked out, because it really doesn't work in the landlord's case if you're not paying, and it really doesn't work in the student's case if they don't want to pay or can't pay for whatever their unit that they're going to be in.
Got it. And this flexibility, I think, also brings up another good question, which I think you're probably the best to answer this, is in terms of things are going to happen at some point as you're leasing. It might not happen in your first or second year, but eventually something happens. Where is kind of like the best value for students in terms of having peace of mind. Let's say it's midterms and there is a rodent infestation in their property, and reaching out to a larger apartment complex versus a property manager versus a private landlord. Can you kind of paint the picture of which one of those options offers the most peace of mind to students?
You know, that is a tough question, because I really think it's going to be case by case. You could have a property manager at a large company that says, okay, we'll get to it. And you can have a mom and pop that reacts instantly. It's going to be a case by case, and that's going to be something where you do your due diligence on the company you're renting from. Make sure that they're a good company, a reputable company. Make sure the mom and pop landlord that you're renting from is a reputable person, whether it be a word of mouth type of situation, whether you look up online and see, hey, someone said something bad about this person. What you're really looking for is someone that's professional, that's going to abide by the terms of the lease, and is going to do right by you, because you don't want to be in that situation where there's a major infestation. And what a lot of leases do, especially in single family homes, is they put the onus of a rodent infestation or something of that type of nature back onto the tenant. So you might be the one that's responsible for calling in one of the pest service companies to take care of it, or treating it yourself, especially if it's something where you maybe have not been cleaning up the property, you've been leaving food out, not taking your trash out. You have to look at these root causes. So it's not an easy question where someone says, oh, it's definitely going to be the larger landlord's going to be one that responds instantly, or the smaller landlord's going to respond instantly. There's going to be some factors that play into whose responsibility is it, who's going to be the one that's going to be the best to respond to that, specifically because maybe there's some type of underlying factor, whether it be trash or whatever the case might be.
That's the complete honest truth, and I appreciate you sharing that. I think it all boils down to talk to the person that you're going to be renting from. If it's an apartment complex, make sure to ask those questions. Don't be afraid to have the conversation. It doesn't cost anything. Just be open and ask, because at the end of the day, it's a business relationship, but you need to be comfortable in the place that you're going to be living and know what to expect.
You're spot on, 100%.
Great. John, is there, what would be the biggest takeaway that you would leave students with as they're watching this? And you've shared a lot of great insights with us. If they forget everything else that you said during this podcast, what would be the largest takeaway that they should keep in mind?
I really think that going back to having the hard discussion about budgeting and making sure that everyone can pay for the rent and be okay paying for rent is really a very important topic to cover between your roommates, and making sure that everyone works together as a roommate so that you don't have conflicting personalities, because you don't want this to become a stressful situation. You want this to be, as we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, an exciting time. You're moving into your off-campus housing. This is going to be awesome, right? Don't set yourself up for failure. Set yourself up for the greatest of successes.
I couldn't agree with you more. That is super valuable. Thank you so much for sharing that. This has been another podcast with Ditch Your Dorm with Jove. John, thank you so much for joining us today. And so that you all know, John is a property manager. His company is Property Management Redefined, and he's redefining how you rent in Temple, Drexel, and UPenn area. So if you have any questions for him, feel free to reach out to us. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks, Alex. I really appreciate it.